When installing a magneto on an engine, the piston in the number 1 cylinder must be a prescribed number of degrees before top dead center on the compression stroke. How is the strength of a magneto-magnet checked? Hold the points open and check the output of the primary coil with an AC ammeter while operating the magneto at a specific speed. Aircraft magneto housings are usually ventilated in order to provide cooling and remove corrosive gases produced by normal arcing. What components make up the magnetic system of a magneto? Rotating magnet, the pole shoes, the pole shoe extensions, and the core coil. What is the difference between a low-tension and high-tension engine ignition system? A low-tension system uses a transformer coil near the spark plugs to boost voltage, while the high-tension system voltage is constant from the magneto to the spark plug. Low-tension second coil at spark plug, high-tension second coil in magneto. In a low-tension ignition system, each spark plug requires an individual secondary coil. In order to turn a magneto off, the primary circuit must be grounded. When the ignition system of a single reciprocating engine aircraft is turned to the off position, the primary circuits of both magnetos are grounded. The electrical circuit from the spark plug back to the magneto is completed by grounding through the engine structure. When performing a magneto ground check on an engine, correct operation is indicated by a slight drop in RPM. Failure of an engine to cease fire after turning the magneto switch off is an indication of an open P lead to ground. In the aircraft magneto system, if the P lead is disconnected, the magneto will be on regardless of ignition switch position. If an aircraft ignition switch is turned off and the engine continues to run normally, the trouble is probably caused by an open ground lead in the magneto. The spark is produced in a magneto ignition system when the breaker points are beginning to open. When a shower of sparks ignition system is activated at an engine start, a spark plug fires only while both the retard and advance breaker points are open. In reference to a shower of sparks ignition system,
only number 2 is true.
The timed opening of the retard breaker points is designated to prevent engine kickback during start. A magneto ignition switch is connected parallel to the breaker points. What would be the result if a magneto breaker point mainspring did not have significant tension? The points will float or bounce. What will be the result of increasing the gap of the breaker points in a magneto? Advance the spark and decrease its intensity. Alignment of the marks provided for internal timing of a magneto indicates that the magneto is in the gap position. The gap angle is usually defined as the number of degrees between the neutral position of the rotating magnet and the position where the contact points open. Magneto breaker points must be timed to open when the greatest magnetic field stress exists in the magnetic circuit. When a magneto is operating, what is the probable cause of a shift in internal timing? The cam follower wear and/or the breaker points wear. When internally timing a magneto, the breaker points begin to open when the rotating magnet is a few degrees past the neutral position. Magneto timing drift is caused by erosion of the breaker points and wear of the cam followers. What is the approximate position of the rotating magnet in a high-tension magneto when the points first close? Full register. When initially timing a magneto, the breaker points begin to open when the magnetic poles are a few degrees beyond the neutral position. If new breaker points are installed in a magneto on an engine, it will be necessary to time the magneto internally and the magneto to the engine. Magneto breaker point opening, relative to the position of the rotating magnet and distributor rotor, internal timing can be set most accurately during assembly of the magneto before installation on the engine. When timing a magneto internally, the alignment of the timing marks indicates that the magnets are in the gap position. In a high-tension ignition system, a primary capacitor of too low a capacity will cause the breaker contacts to burn. Which of the following breaker point characteristics is associated with a faulty capacitor? Coarse-grained. A defective primary capacitor in a magneto is indicated by burned and pitted breaker points. Capacitance after firing a spark plug is caused by the stored energy in the ignition shielded lead unloading after normal timed ignition. In an aircraft ignition system, one of the functions of the capacitor is to facilitate a more rapid collapse of the magnetic field in the primary coil. What is the electrical location of the primary capacitor in a high-tension magneto? In parallel with the breaker points. A magneto ignition switch is connected parallel to the breaker points. What is a result of flashover in a distributor? Conductive carbon trail. The condition that occurs when moisture allows high voltage current to flash across a non-conductive surface in a magneto is known as flashover. Carbon tracking is a fine pencil-like line running across a non-conductive surface of a magneto that is caused by flashover. Carbon tracking. Conductive carbon trail. Flashover. What should be used to clean grease or carbon tracks from capacitors or coils that are used in magnetos? Acetone. The magnetic circuit of a magneto consists of a permanent, multiple rotating magnet. The core is made of soft iron. What is the radial location of the two north poles of a fourth pole rotating magnet in a high-tension magneto? 180 degrees apart. Magnetic breaker points must be timed to open when the greatest magnetic field stress exists in the magnetic circuit. What component of a dual magneto is shared by both ignition systems? Rotating magnet. The greatest density of flux lines in the magnetic circuit of a rotating magnet-type magneto occurs when the magnet is in what position? Full alignment with the field shoes. Magneto pole shoes are generally made of laminations of high-grade soft iron. Which of the following are distinct circuits of a high-tension magneto? Magnetic, primary, and secondary. As an aircraft engine speed is increased, the voltage induced in the primary coil of the magneto increases. When does battery current flow through the primary circuit of a battery ignition coil? When the breaker points are closed and the ignition switch is on. The amount of voltage generated in any magneto-secondary coil is determined by the number of windings and by the rate of collapse of the magnetic field around the primary. In a high-tension ignition system, the current in the magneto-secondary winding is induced when the primary circuit is interrupted. When will the voltage in the secondary winding of a magneto installed on a normally operating engine, be at its highest value. Just prior to spark plug firing. What likely effect would a cracked distributor rotor have on a magneto? Ground the secondary circuit through the crack. What are the parts of a distributor in an aircraft engine ignition system? Block. Rotor. What is the relationship between distributor and crankshaft speed of an aircraft reciprocating engine? The distributor turns at 1/2 crankshaft speed. A certain 9-cylinder radio engine using a non-compensated single-unit dual-type magneto with a 4-pole rotating magnet and separately mounted distributors. Which of the following will have the lowest RPM at any given engine speed? Distributors. When testing a magneto distributor block for electrical leakage, which of the following pieces of test equipment should be used? High-tension harness tester. What is the purpose of a safety gap in some magnetos? To discharge the secondary coil's voltage if an open occurs in the secondary circuit. The purpose of a safety gap in a magneto is to protect the high voltage winding from damage. The numbers appearing on the ignition distributor block indicate the sparking order of the distributor. When replacing a complete ignition wiring harness, the distributor blocks are not numbered. For all high-tension leads in this case, install the first cylinder to fire number 1 location on the block, the second in the firing order to number 2 location, etc. How are most radial engine spark plug wires connected to the distributor block? By use of cable piercing screws.
Only number 1 is true.
The platinum and iridium ground electrodes, used on fine wire spark plugs, are extremely brittle and can be broken if they are improperly handled or adjusted. The spark occurs at the spark plug when the ignition's primary circuit is broken. If staggered ignition timing is used, the spark plug nearest the exhaust valve will fire first. Which of the following would be cause for rejection of a spark plug? Insulator tip cracked. Spark plugs are considered worn out when the electrodes have worn away to about 1/2 of their original dimensions. Defective spark plugs will cause the engine to run rough at all speeds. Ignition check during engine run-up indicates excessive RPM drop during operation on the right magneto. The major portion of the RPM loss occurs rapidly after switching to the right magneto position, a fast drop. The most likely causes faulty or fouled spark plugs. A spark plug is fouled when it spark grounds without jumping electrodes. Spark plug fouling, caused by lead deposits, occurs most often when cylinder head temperatures are relatively low. Upon inspection of the spark plugs in an aircraft engine, the plugs were found caked with a heavy black soot. This indicates a rich mixture. Which of the following could cause damage to the nose ceramic or to the electrode of an aircraft spark plug? Improper gapping procedures. What will be the effect if the spark plugs are gapped too wide? Hard starting. What will be the effect if the spark plugs are gapped too wide and the engine is operating at a high-altitude airport? Engine fails to idle properly. Using a cold spark plug in a high-compression aircraft engine would probably result in normal operation. What will be the result of using too hot a spark plug? Pre-ignition. Hot spark plugs are generally used in aircraft power plants, with comparatively low operating temperatures. Spark plug heat range is determined by its ability to transfer heat to the cylinder head. Which of the following statements most accurately describes spark plug heat range? A cold plug is designed so that the insulator tip is reasonably short to hasten the rate of heat transferred from the tip through the spark plug shell to the cylinder head. A spark plug's heat range is the result of its ability to transfer heat from the firing end of the spark plug to the cylinder head. When removing a shielded spark plug, which of the following is most likely to be damaged? Insulator core. Shielding is used on spark plug and ignition wires to prevent interference with radio reception. If it is found that a shielded ignition system does not adequately reduce ignition noise, it may be necessary to install a filter between the magneto and the magneto switch. Why are high-tension ignition cables frequently routed from the distributors to the spark plugs in flexible metallic conduits? To reduce the effect of the high-frequency electromagnetic waves emitted during operation. Sharp bends should be avoided in ignition leads, primarily because weak points may develop in the insulation, through which high-tension current can leak. Anytime a conductor carries high voltage energy and is installed near a conductive mass, the insulation around the conductor is exposed to what? Electromagnetic radiation. The numbers appearing on the ignition distributor block indicate the sparking order of the distributor. If a spark plug lead becomes grounded at the magneto will not be affected. What test instrument can be used to test an ignition harness for suspected leakage? A high-tension lead tester. How does the ignition system of a gas turbine engine differ from that of a reciprocating engine? A high-energy spark is required for ignition. Which of the following are included in a typical turbine engine ignition system? 2 igniter plugs, 1 exciter unit, 2 high-tension igniter leads. In a turbine engine, DC capacitor, discharge ignition system, where are the high-voltage pulses from? At the triggering transformer. The type of ignition system used on most turbine aircraft engines is capacitor discharge. The capacitor-type ignition system is used almost universally on turbine engines, primarily because of its high voltage and high heat intensity. Which statement is correct regarding the ignition system of a turbine engine? The system is normally de-energized as soon as the engine starts. Why do turbine engine ignition systems require high energy? To ignite the fuel under conditions of high altitude and low temperatures. In a turbine engine, DC capacitor, discharge ignition system, where are the high voltage pulses from? At the triggering transformer. Generally, when removing a turbine engine igniter plug, in order to eliminate the possibility of the technician receiving a lethal shock, the ignition switch is turned off and the igniter lead is disconnected from the plug, and the sender electrode grounded to the engine, after disconnecting the transformer exciter input lead, and waiting the prescribed time. Igniter plugs used in turbine engines have a long service life, because they do not require continuous operation. The constrained gap igniter plug, used in some gas turbine engines operates at a cooler temperature because the construction is such that the spark occurs beyond the face of the combustion chamber liner. Great caution should be exercised in handling damaged harmonically sealed turbine engine igniter transformer units because some contain radioactive material. Why are turbine engine igniters less susceptible to fouling than reciprocating engine spark plugs? The high-intensity spark cleans the igniter. To prevent seizing of the igniter plug, the threads in many cases are lubricated with an anti-seize compound. To prevent seizing of the igniter plugs, the threads in many cases are silver-plated. Igniter plugs have nickel-chromium plating for high heat and corrosion resistance.